Welcome back to Africa 54. African migrants in Israel protesting against a government detention law announced plans to extend their strike and protests across Tel Aviv. 3 weeks ago, Israel's parliament approved the law permitting authorities to detain migrants without valid visas indefinitely. The measure has been condemned by critics as a violation of human rights. The migrants are demanding the Israeli government examine their requests to be recognized as asylum seekers.
Our demand is clear and loud that we ask asylum in Israel. Today we are asking asylum, protection, to be recognized as refugees in this democratic country of Israel.
Israel considers most African migrants in the country, particularly the majority who are from Eritrea and Sudan, as economic migrants and labels them infiltrators. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he views the presence of many of the Africans as a threat to Israel's Jewish social fabric.
I want to make clear that demonstrations won't help them. Strikes won't help them. I want to make clear that these aren't refugees who we treat according to international norms. These are illegal infiltrators seeking work, and we're determined to bring them to justice.
Some 60,000 migrants, largely from Eritrea and Sudan, have crossed into Israel across a once porous border with Egypt since 2006, Israeli authorities say. UNHCR representative Walpurga Elbrecht criticized Israel's official description of migrants as infiltrators, saying most were refugees or deserved international protection.
If we look at the situation of the countries where these asylum seekers are coming from, and looking also at the practice of how other countries deal with those asylum seekers, where we find high recognition rates, it is quite evident they are not infiltrators and they should be treated as asylum seekers. Their claims should be assessed in a fair and transparent manner.
Detainees can leave but must report back 3 times a day, including at nightfall, and may be held without a time limit pending voluntary repatriation, implementation of deportation orders, or resolution of their asylum requests. Now, for more on the ongoing protest by the African migrants, we are joined via Skype by Scott Bobb, VOA's Jerusalem correspondent. Scott, give us some information on what happened today.
Good evening. Well, there are several thousand of the migrants, mostly from Tel Aviv. They came up by bus and car and for several hours chanted near the Knesset, the parliament, saying we are refugees, we're not criminals, and asking for the government to repeal this law that condemns some of them to prison and could be forever. So it was quite emotional, but it was an orderly crowd, and they dispersed eventually and went back.
Now, Scott, where did the problem begin? Because these people insist they're refugees.
Well, it began, as your piece just said, about 7 years ago, as a trickle, a few hundred a year, and it began to grow to thousands a year. And the Israeli government became concerned because it's a small country, about the size of the state of New Jersey, with a population of 8 million, and it felt that because it had this open desert border with Egypt across the Sinai, that this influx, which was just thousands a year, could turn into tens of thousands or more, and the country would be overwhelmed. And so it began to take measures. The first was to build this barrier, a 5-meter high fence across the Sinai along its border with Egypt, and that has stopped the influx of new people, but it now has about 50,000 that came across, and as part of its policy, it is not giving asylum. It rejects that and says that they're economic migrants looking for work. And so as a result, they suffer in limbo. A few find jobs, most do not. And lately, some of the ones that have been finding jobs have been losing them as the government cracks down on employers.
Now, they said there's been this ongoing strike. To what extent has it impacted Israel, at least to demonstrate the kind of contribution they give to society there?
It's impacted where they work to a degree, and that's mostly in the service sector, hotels, restaurants, to a lesser degree in some of the other areas. And some of these services in areas like Tel Aviv and Eilat, where they're numerous, have had to struggle to cope because they haven't been able to find staff to replace them even temporarily. Some of these refugees have actually sent relatives to work for them or come back later because they've been working for a long time and they have good relationships with these employers. So it's created a stress in some parts of the economy.
Very briefly, what options do they have?
Well, at the moment, it's a confrontation, which is why you're seeing these demonstrations. The government insists, as Mr. Netanyahu said in your clip, that they will leave or they will be imprisoned, and they're trying to encourage them with stipends, $3,500 to leave. But many of them do not want to leave, and so they're fighting to stay and hoping that they can achieve their goals.
Actually, do you know of any, or have you heard of anywhere accepting this stipend and living voluntarily?
Yes, there have been several thousand that have accepted the stipend and have returned. Last year, there were some refugees from Ivory Coast, for example, who returned, not necessarily voluntarily, but it was decided that because the war there had ended, the hostilities, that they should no longer be considered refugees. And so they did return. In all, there have been some thousands that have returned, but the majority do want to stay. And since most of them are from Sudan and Eritrea, which have some ongoing human rights or conflict issues, they do have a case to make, at least in front of the international refugee authorities. So there'll be more developments here, but at the moment it's a bit of a standoff.
Thank you, Scott. Well, Scott Bobb joining us live from Jerusalem.